What happens when royal privilege collides with morning television reality? In just 33 seconds, one thoughtless comment would destroy years of carefully crafted public image and send shockwaves through an entire network. This is the untold story of the moment Prince Harry was escorted off the Good Morning America set, and the explosive confrontation that made it impossible for him to ever return. It started like any other Tuesday morning at the Good Morning America studios in Times Square. The makeup artists were finishing their work, carefully applying powder to guests' foreheads to prevent shine under the bright studio lights. The camera operators were checking their angles, making small adjustments to ensure every shot would be perfect. The sound technicians were testing microphone levels, listening through their headphones for any potential issues. The energy in the studio was calm, professional, routine. Host Michael Strahan was in his dressing room, reviewing his notes for what was supposed to be a friendly interview with Prince Harry. He had spent the previous evening researching the Duke's latest charitable initiative, a mental health program specifically designed to help veterans transition back to civilian life. It was an admirable cause, one that Michael genuinely wanted to highlight for his viewers. He had prepared thoughtful questions about the program's structure, its goals, and the personal experiences that had inspired Harry to create it. The Duke of Sussex had agreed to appear on the show specifically to discuss this initiative. His publicist had sent over talking points and suggested questions, all of which seemed reasonable and straightforward. This was meant to be a promotional opportunity, a chance for Harry to speak directly to millions of Americans about something he cared deeply about. It seemed like the perfect feel-good segment to kick off the morning, the kind of interview that would leave everyone feeling inspired and uplifted. Michael had conducted thousands of interviews over his 20-year career. He prided himself on his ability to put guests at ease, to create an environment where they felt comfortable opening up and sharing their stories. He was known in the industry as someone who could handle difficult conversations with grace, who could ask tough questions without being confrontational, who could challenge guests while still treating them with respect. It was a delicate balance, one he had spent 2 decades perfecting. Michael Strahan, a 20-year veteran of morning television, had built his reputation on being warm yet professional, asking tough questions while maintaining respect for his guests. He had interviewed presidents who tried to dodge questions about policy failures. He had sat across from celebrities who wanted to talk only about their latest projects while avoiding scandal. He had spoken with world leaders who attempted to use his platform for propaganda. Through it all, he had maintained his integrity, asked the questions that needed to be asked, and treated every guest with the same standard of respect and accountability. His reputation in the industry was impeccable. Producers loved working with him because he was reliable and professional. Guests generally appreciated his approach, even when his questions made them uncomfortable, because they knew he was fair. This morning, he assumed, would be no different. He had no reason to expect problems. Harry's team had been cooperative and communicative during the planning process. The prince himself was known for being passionate about his charitable work, and talking about causes close to his heart usually brought out the best in him. Michael finished his coffee, straightened his tie in the mirror, and headed toward the studio floor. When he walked onto the set, the atmosphere was pleasant and professional. The crew greeted him with their usual good mornings and friendly waves. The stage manager gave him a thumbs up, indicating they were on schedule. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Michael walked over to the interview area, a cozy setup with 2 comfortable chairs angled toward each other, a small table between them holding glasses of water. The lighting was warm and inviting, designed to make guests feel at ease rather than interrogated. Prince Harry emerged from the green room a few minutes before airtime. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his appearance carefully managed by his team. Michael stood to greet him, extending his hand with his usual confident smile. Harry shook it briefly, his grip firm but his expression somewhat guarded. Michael noticed this but did not think much of it. Many guests were nervous before going on live television. It was completely normal. He made a point of engaging in light conversation, trying to help Harry relax before the cameras started rolling. "Thank you so much for being here," Michael said warmly. "We are really looking forward to hearing about your veterans program. It sounds like an incredible initiative." Harry nodded but said little in response. A makeup artist came over to do a final check, dabbing a bit more powder on his forehead. The sound technician clipped a microphone to Harry's jacket and asked him to count to 10 so they could set the levels properly. Harry complied, his voice flat and businesslike. Michael sensed a certain tension but told himself it would dissipate once they got into the actual conversation about the charity work. People often loosened up once the interview began. The stage manager began the countdown. 10 seconds, 5 seconds. The red light on the camera blinked on. They were live. Michael turned to face the camera with his practiced, welcoming smile and delivered his introduction smoothly. Welcome back to Good Morning America. I am thrilled to be joined this morning by Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, who is here to talk about his latest charitable endeavor, a groundbreaking mental health program designed specifically for military veterans. Your Royal Highness, thank you for being with us today. Harry managed a polite smile for the camera. Michael proceeded with his first question, an easy one designed to let Harry tell his story and explain the motivation behind the program. Can you tell our viewers what inspired you to create this particular program? The first few minutes went smoothly enough. Harry spoke about his time in the military, about the connections he had formed with fellow service members, about witnessing firsthand the struggles that many veterans face when returning to civilian life. His words were articulate and passionate, and Michael could see that this was genuinely important to him. The studio audience, a small group seated off to the side, nodded along approvingly, some dabbing at their eyes when Harry spoke about veterans who had lost their battles with depression and trauma. Michael asked about the specific services the program would offer. Harry explained that it would provide free counseling, peer support groups, and job placement assistance. He talked about the importance of addressing not just the psychological wounds of war, but also the practical challenges of reintegration. He spoke about dignity and respect and giving back to those who had given so much. It was exactly the kind of substantive, heartfelt discussion that Michael had hoped for. The producers in the control room were pleased. This was good television, meaningful content that would resonate with viewers. They were about 7 minutes into the interview when Michael decided it was time to ask the question that would change everything. It was not a gotcha question. It was not designed to embarrass or trap anyone. It was simply the kind of question that any responsible journalist would ask about any charitable organization seeking public support. He leaned forward slightly, his tone remaining warm and conversational, showing genuine interest rather than suspicion. So, Your Royal Highness, this program requires significant funding. Can you walk our viewers through where the money is coming from and how it will be allocated? It was a standard question, the kind any journalist would ask about a charitable initiative. But Harry's expression changed instantly. His smile vanished. His posture stiffened. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Michael with visible irritation. I think that is really none of your concern, Michael, Harry said, his voice taking on an edge that made everyone in the studio tense up. The people who need to know about the finances are already informed. I did not come here to be interrogated about money. Michael was taken aback but maintained his professional composure. He had dealt with defensive guests before. He tried to clarify. I apologize if that came across as an interrogation. I just thought our viewers, many of whom might want to donate or get involved, would appreciate transparency about how their contributions would be used. It is a fair question for any charitable organization. Harry's eyes narrowed dangerously. The shift in his demeanor was so sudden and dramatic that it caught everyone off guard. His jaw clenched, his shoulders tensed. The friendly, passionate advocate who had been speaking moments before seemed to evaporate, replaced by someone defensive and hostile. What happened next would be replayed countless times across social media and news networks, analyzed frame by media critics and body language experts. The prince leaned forward aggressively, pointing his finger directly at Michael in a gesture that was unmistakably threatening. His voice, when he spoke, was sharp enough to cut through the pleasant studio atmosphere like a knife. You know what your problem is, Michael? You sit here in your comfortable little studio day after day, making your comfortable little salary that pays for your comfortable little life. And you think you have the right to question people who are actually trying to make a real difference in the world. You think you can just demand answers from anyone who walks through that door. Do you have any idea what I have sacrificed? Do you have any concept of what it is like to give up literally everything, your entire life, your family, your country, for a cause you believe in? Of course you do not. You have never sacrificed anything. You just sit in that chair and judge people. The personal attack was stunning in its venom. The studio went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpeted floor. Camera operators exchanged shocked glances with each other, their hands still on their equipment, but their attention riveted on the unfolding drama. The audience members sat frozen, unsure whether they should react or remain still. One woman in the third row had her hand over her mouth in surprise. The producers in the control room were frantically discussing whether to cut to commercial immediately or let this play out, their voices rising over each other in the cramped space. Michael, to his enormous credit, remained outwardly calm despite the shock of being attacked so personally and so publicly. His years of experience were evident in every aspect of his response. He did not raise his voice. He did not match Harry's aggression with his own. He did not allow himself to be baited into a shouting match. Instead, he took a deliberate breath, maintained eye contact with his guest, and spoke slowly and clearly, ensuring that every word was measured and professional. His voice remained steady, though those who knew him well might have detected a slight edge to it, a hint of steel beneath the velvet. I respect your dedication to this cause, and I'm quite certain our viewers do too. Many of them are veterans themselves, or family members of veterans, and they appreciate anyone who works to support that community. But accountability and transparency are fundamentally important for any organization that is asking the public for their support and their hard-earned money. That is not a personal attack on you or your intentions. That is simply journalism. That is my job. That is what our viewers expect from us and what they deserve. Harry's face flushed red. He was no longer making any attempt to hide his anger. His voice rose, loud enough that it could probably be heard in the hallways outside the studio. Journalism? Is that what you call this? This is tabloid garbage. You are just like all the rest of them, trying to tear down anyone who dares to stand out, anyone who refuses to play by your ridiculous rules. I came here as a courtesy, and this is how you treat me? Michael maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. His years of experience were showing. He knew that losing his cool would only make things worse. He took a breath and responded with remarkable restraint. I treat every guest with respect, and I ask every guest questions that our viewers want answered. If you feel that asking about financial transparency is disrespectful, then perhaps we have different definitions of respect. That response seemed to push Harry over the edge. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the studio floor. His microphone, still attached to his jacket, swung wildly. He jabbed his finger in Michael's direction again, his voice dripping with contempt. You want to talk about respect? You do not even know the meaning of the word. You are nothing but a puppet, reading whatever your producers tell you to say, asking whatever gotcha questions they feed you. You have never done anything meaningful in your life. You just sit here and judge people who are actually making a difference. The insult hung in the air. It was a deeply personal attack, completely uncalled for, and everyone in the studio knew it. Michael's jaw tightened slightly, the first sign that Harry's words had landed. But still, the veteran host did not lose his composure. He stood up slowly, matching Harry's stance, and when he spoke, his voice was firm but not aggressive. I've spent 2 decades in this chair asking important questions and giving people a platform to share their stories. I have never claimed to be anything more than a journalist doing my job. But I will not be spoken to like this. Not by you, not by anyone. If you cannot handle a basic question about financial transparency, then perhaps you are not ready for this kind of public initiative. Harry's face went from red to almost purple. His hands were trembling with rage. He turned away from Michael and looked directly into the camera, as if he wanted to address the viewers himself, bypassing the host entirely. You people need to understand something. I do not have to answer to anyone. Not to him, not to this network, not to any of you sitting at home judging me from your couches. I have given up more than you could possibly imagine. I have walked away from everything to live my truth, and I will not be lectured by some American television host who thinks he knows better than me. The control room was in chaos now. The executive producer was shouting orders. Someone needed to do something, and fast. But before anyone could react, Michael made a decision. He looked past Harry toward the edge of the set where the segment producer was standing, frozen in shock. I think we need to take a break, Michael said clearly, his voice cutting through the tension. Sarah, can we get someone from security, please? Harry whirled back around to face Michael, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. Security? You are calling security on me? Do you have any idea who I am? Michael stood his ground, his expression now completely neutral, all warmth gone from his face. Yes, I know exactly who you are. And right now, you are a guest on my show who is being verbally abusive and creating a hostile environment. That is not acceptable here, regardless of your title or your last name. I am going to have to ask you to leave." The words were measured and professional, but their impact was devastating. Prince Harry, a member of the British royal family, was being kicked off a morning talk show. The humiliation of the moment was written all over his face. But instead of backing down or apologizing, he doubled down on his aggression. "You are going to regret this, Michael. Do you understand that? This will be the biggest mistake of your career. I will make sure everyone knows how I was treated here, how this network ambushed me with hostile questions and then threw me out like some common criminal. Your bosses are going to hear about this." 2 security guards had arrived at the edge of the set. They stood at a respectful distance, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but ready to intervene if necessary. Michael glanced at them briefly, then looked back at Harry. "My bosses will see the footage of this interview. They will see that I asked a fair question and that you responded with personal insults and aggression. I'm comfortable with that. Now, you can leave on your own, or these gentlemen can escort you out. The choice is yours." For a moment, it looked like Harry might continue the confrontation. His fists were clenched at his sides. His breathing was heavy. The entire studio seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, finally, Harry yanked the microphone off his jacket with enough force that the clip broke, tearing a small piece of fabric. He threw the microphone onto the chair where he had been sitting. "I am done with this. I am done with all of you." He turned and strode toward the exit, the security guards following at a careful distance. But he was not finished yet. Just before he reached the door that led off the set, he turned back one last time and shouted across the studio, "You are all parasites, every single one of you. You build your careers destroying people like me, and then you act like you are the good guys. Well, I see right through it. I see exactly what you are." And with that final outburst, Prince Harry disappeared through the door. The security guards closed behind him. The studio door slammed shut with a hollow bang that echoed through the silent space. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Michael remained standing beside his chair, his expression unreadable. The camera operators still had their cameras trained on the empty chairs where the interview was supposed to have taken place. Finally, Michael turned to face the main camera. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable weight to his words. "Well, that is obviously not how we hoped this interview would go. We invited Prince Harry here to discuss an important cause, and we asked what I believe was a reasonable question about accountability. I am sorry that our busy but distant viewers had to witness that exchange. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will continue with our scheduled programming." As the show cut to commercial, Michael finally allowed himself to sit down. He loosened his tie slightly and let out a long breath. The segment producer rushed over to check on him, but he waved her off with a tired smile. "I'm fine, Sarah. Really. Just get me the footage. I want to make sure we have everything recorded." In the weeks that followed, the incident would be analyzed and debated endlessly. Some people defended Harry, claiming that the media had been unfair to him for years and that he had simply reached his breaking point. Others praised Michael for maintaining his professionalism in the face of such aggression and for refusing to be intimidated by royal status. But in that moment, standing on the Good Morning America set with a broken microphone and an empty chair across from him, Michael Strahan knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had done his job. He had asked the questions that needed to be asked. He had stood his ground when challenged. And he had protected the integrity of his show and his crew. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath. In the control room, someone had the presence of mind to save all the footage, knowing that this would become one of the most talked about moments in morning television history. The executive producer was already fielding calls from network executives, all of them wanting to know what had just happened. Michael remained in his chair during the commercial break, going over in his mind what had just occurred. He thought about the question he had asked, analyzing it from every angle to make sure he had not overstepped. No, it had been fair. It had been important. Any charitable organization seeking public support should be willing to discuss how funds would be used. That was not controversial. That was basic due diligence. He thought about Harry's reaction, the immediate defensiveness, the personal attacks, the entitled outrage at being asked to explain himself. It spoke to something deeper than just a bad day or interview nerves. It revealed an expectation of deference, a belief that certain questions simply should not be asked of certain people. And that was exactly the kind of thinking that journalists like Michael had spent their careers pushing back against. The makeup artist came over to touch up Michael's appearance before they went back on air. She did not say anything, but she gave him an encouraging pat on the shoulder. The gesture meant more to him than she probably realized. He straightened his tie, took a sip of water, and prepared to continue the show. When the cameras came back on, Michael delivered the rest of the program flawlessly. He interviewed the remaining guests with his usual warmth and professionalism. He joked with his co-hosts during the lighter segments. To anyone who tuned in after the commercial break, it would have seemed like just another normal morning on Good Morning America. But everyone who had been in that studio knew different. They had witnessed something rare and significant. They had seen what happens when entitlement meets accountability, when someone used to automatic respect encounters someone who believes respect must be earned. They had seen a host stand up for the principles of journalism, even when it meant confronting a prince. As Michael wrapped up the show and said goodbye to the viewers, he felt a strange sense of calm. He had not sought out conflict. He had not tried to create drama. He had simply done his job, asked his questions, and refused to back down when challenged. If that made him the villain in some people's eyes, so be it. He could live with that. The studio lights dimmed as the show ended. Crew members began breaking down the set for the next segment. Michael unbuttoned his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, finally allowing himself to relax. The segment producer approached him again, this time with a tablet showing social media reactions. They were already flooding in, thousands of comments and shares every minute. "You okay, Michael?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. He nodded, managing a small smile. He looked around the studio, at the crew members who had stood by him during the confrontation, at the empty chair where Harry had been sitting just minutes before. "Yeah, Sarah, I am okay. Better than okay, actually, because we just proved something important. We proved that on this show, everyone gets asked the tough questions. It does not matter if you are a prince or a president or the person next door. If you come here, you come prepared to be held accountable. That is what journalism is supposed to be." Sarah smiled and squeezed his arm. She had worked with Michael for 7 years and had never been prouder of him than she was in that moment. The story would dominate headlines for days. Other networks would request copies of the footage. Media analysts would break down every word, every gesture, every moment of the confrontation. Some would criticize Michael for being too aggressive. Others would praise him for his integrity. The debate would rage on social media, in newspapers, on other television shows. But for Michael Strahan, the veteran host who had spent 20 years perfecting his craft, the conclusion was simple. He had asked a question, a fair question, a necessary question, and when he had been attacked for it, he had stood his ground. He had not apologized for doing his job. He had not cowered in the face of royal anger. He had maintained his standards and protected his platform. That evening, as Michael left the studio and walked out into the New York City streets, he thought about how the morning had started. Just a routine interview about a charity program. How quickly things had escalated. How a single question had exposed such raw sensitivity and entitlement. How 33 seconds of defensiveness had spiraled into a complete meltdown. He had not wanted it to end that way. He truly had hoped for a productive conversation about an important cause. But he had learned long ago that you cannot control how guests will react to legitimate questions. All you can control is your own response, your own integrity, your own commitment to the truth. Michael Strahan had controlled those things perfectly. He had been the professional in the room. He had been the adult. He had been the one who understood that respect is not about titles or family names. It is about how you treat people, how you handle disagreement, how you respond when challenged. And in that studio, on that Tuesday morning, there had been only one person who truly understood what respect means. It had not been the prince who threw tantrums when asked about accountability. It had been the host who asked the tough questions and refused to be intimidated. The broken microphone would be repaired. The chair would be sat in by other guests. The show would go on, as it always did. But the message had been sent, clear and unambiguous. Good Morning America was a place where everyone, no matter who they were, would be held to the same standard. Questions would be asked. Accountability would be expected. Tantrums would not be tolerated. Michael walked toward the subway station, blending into the crowd of New Yorkers going about their evening. Tomorrow he would be back in that chair, interviewing new guests, asking new questions, doing the job he loved. And he would do it with the same integrity and professionalism he had shown that morning, because that was who Michael Strahan was. That was what Good Morning America represented, and no amount of royal fury or entitled outrage would ever change that. The show had standards, the host had principles, and when those principles were tested, they had held firm. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the drama, not the headlines, not the social media firestorm. What mattered was that when it counted, when it was difficult, when it would have been easier to back down, Michael Strahan had done the right thing. He had been the good guy in a situation that demanded nothing less.